Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we are going to the middle of nowhere for some truly chilling tales, so I really hope you enjoy. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I went camping with my city slicker fiancée, now wife. She had never been camping before. A day or two before we left, I bought my first pistol. This was around 1999. We went to Woods Canyon Lake in April at the start of the season to avoid the crush of people. It's a man-made lake. The campground was well developed and park-like. I normally like a more secluded spot, but my fiancée was not looking to have a Jason Voorhees camping experience. We arrived late Friday night around 11. My old beater car was having trouble due to the thinner air. I hadn't stopped to adjust the carb in Payson. We select a spot and quietly try to set up. It was quiet. Most people never understand when you say that, but it was so quiet it was loud. There were a few occupied campsites a few hundred yards away, and you could hear people breathing and snoring. It was very dark. There was no moon or light pollution. Our lanterns cast a feeble glow, and it seemed like they barely pushed back the night. We must have sounded like a troop of elephants trying to get our tiny tent set up. We went to bed right away because we had worked all day, then drove up from Phoenix without rest. My first screw up was not realizing how cold it got at night and making sure our gear was good enough. We woke up so cold at 3 a.m., shivering very hard we couldn't even light a match. I finally got the propane heater going on her tent and covered her with my sleeping bag and blanket so she wouldn't die. I lit it and sat by the fire to get warm and drank coffee until the sun came up. I didn't notice anything odd except the unnatural quiet. No animal sounds or anything. The hiss of my stove as the coffee perked sounded like a jet engine. The next day was nice. We did stuff like fishing and rode a boat around the lake. Looking back, the entire north side of the lake was filled with weird tree structures. There's no easy access to that side of the lake. I felt uneasy rowing so close to the shore on that side for some reason. The day ended with us exhausted and sunburned. A good day. I made a dinner of soup and boiled eggs on the camp stove at sunset. We had recently watched the Blair Witch Project, and I bought her the same hat the girl had, a powder blue stocking cap. We had an old school HI8 video camera and made some parody videos while the food cooked. Hilarious. I drank a few beers and we ate. We put the fire out and headed to our tent for some rest. We had decided to sleep with our bags zipped together to share body heat. A smart choice. She fell asleep right away. For some reason I didn't get sleepy in the woods. Never have. I stayed up reading with a flashlight. We left one lantern burning low off to the left side of the tent. There was a camp far off to our right, and this night they left a lantern on as well. I leave a lantern on because I'm paranoid and want to see the silhouette of something if it enters my camp on the tent wall. I had my new firearm next to me, a 9mm Lawson. It's the worst gun I've ever owned, but it was cheap for a couple of poor kids just starting out. I'm reading something by Dean Koontz when I noticed something. It was quiet. Dead quiet. I listened hard. All I could hear was the hiss of the lantern, my own breathing, and my tinnitus. What caught my attention? I couldn't sense anything, so I went back to reading. A few minutes later, I felt the same thing. There were bears. We had cleaned up dinner and put all food in the food trash in the car. Was it a bear? I briefly heard a baby fussing up north and a mama soothing it. There was another camp about 300 yards north of us that had a baby. That is how quiet it was. That's when I noticed something. Something was pressing lightly against the top of a small frame tent over my head near the peak on the right side. Was it a branch? No, there were no branches in reach because people broke them off for firewood. There was no undergrowth or bushes in the entire site. So what was pushing against my tent? I stayed calm and quiet and watched the spot. It started moving slowly down towards my face. My hand crept slowly for my handgun. It didn't have a shape like a finger or a hand. I could hear it sliding down the cheap single layer of green nylon fabric with a low hiss. With my flashlight on, I could not see light from my lantern or the other campers. I didn't want to douse my light and alert whoever it was that I detected they were doing that. At this point, I was sure it was a person. My wife was, and still is, a very beautiful young woman. She was a perv magnet, with her long, luxurious blonde hair and slim figure. My hand wrapping around the grip of my 9mm as I pretended to be getting comfortable. I even sighed. Well, this perv was about to have the scare of his life. The plan was to bark out at him and cock the gun and then burst out the tent when I heard him run away and fire a few rounds into the woods or follow him to his camp. In a smoothish motion, I pulled the side back on the gun and pressed it into the depression in the tent fabric. I felt resistance. Something was there. "You're messing with the wrong people, friend," I said, or something equally one-linerish. I expected to hear a gasp or a curse or something, but I heard nothing. The resistance faded as whatever it was backed off, still without a sound. A mouse farting would have sounded like a cannon, it was so quiet. I killed my light. The light from the distant lanterns illuminated the right side of my tent with a pale glow. It was clear, not even blocked by a tree or branch. I whipped my head to the left, thinking I would see a skulking shadow on that side from my lantern, but it was also clear. I laid there for many long minutes, straining to hear something, but there wasn't even a breath of wind or a cricket chirping. I decided to stay in the tent and not investigate. I didn't get any sleep that night. I laid there on high alert, with my weapon on my chest, listening. Finally, about an hour before dawn, the crickets started chirping along with the birds. I didn't get out of the tent until I heard the other campers stirring. I checked the entire campsite, but found no print other than ours. No animal tracks, no scat, no sign that anyone but us had been there. So I know about weird stuff that goes on in that area. Turns out there have been Bigfoot sightings near the campground. We had fun that day, starting with a hearty breakfast of bacon and eggs. I didn't mention what happened to my fiancée until later, when we got home. She thought I'd want to stay another night because we had Monday off from work, but I told her that I was tired. We broke camp around 4 p.m. and were on the road home before sunset. What was touching my tent? Who knows? Whatever it was could move in near total silence. It was cautiously respectful of a firearm, but not afraid. It could move and navigate in almost total darkness and left no trace. I have camped in that area twice since then, but not in the last 15 years or so. Nothing strange happened on those trips except to reinforce the strangeness of that first trip. The nights were always filled with noise, insects, and animals. Hell, one time we even got chased into a tent early by a curious skunk coming around. Anyway, that's my weirdest experience, but not my only one. After years of hearing other people's encounters and experiences, I have decided to share with you one of my many personal experiences in the area in which I live. Some background before we start. I live in the most northern part of Norway, which is also the most northern part of Europe. My home lies well above the Arctic Circle. This means, for those of you unaware, that we have very short summers, where the sun never sets, and very long winters, when the sun never rises. Those long and cold months of darkness, in the end and beginning of the year, have made us into, understandably, a superstitious bunch. There are many tales meant to safeguard us growing up. You have Stallo, the mountain troll who steals children who wander too far from their home. You have Mai Ling, who you will not see, but you can hear it stalk you, letting out the cries of a baby. And the Nook, who lies in waiting beneath the surface of lakes and rivers, waiting to drown unsuspecting swimmers. My story begins when I was 16. I had just gotten my hunting license, and my father had even bought me a shotgun for my birthday. This was a big deal for me, as I had always followed my father on hunting trips as a child, but never had I actually shot grouse myself. My father is the stereotypical northern Norwegian. He knows everything about the outdoors, and he can endure any hardship or weather with the same unwavering sense of macabre humor. Once his fingers got stuck in a saw at his workplace, and he peeled the skin off his middle finger like a banana peel. He promptly bandaged it up by himself and kept going. He did not consider going to the doctors to get it looked at before almost 2 weeks had passed, and the stench of bandages made him unbearable to stay in close proximity with. In the end, he needed a skin transplant and several weeks off work before his hand was remotely usable again. So the time of year comes when the sun is out for a few hours in the morning, and me and my dad take the journey to the cabin. This includes an hour of driving and a further hour of boat. You see, our cabin is in a remote area without any road access, so the only way to get there is by a ferry. This means we somewhat already know who is out there, since most people only stay over the weekend and there are no holidays, and the ferry only goes Fridays and Sundays during the weekend. That being said, there are never any more than a handful of people out there at the same time, spread out on an area that is roughly larger than my hometown. This time, on the other hand, it was only me and my father taking the ferry that Friday, so I knew we were going to be alone for the weekend. Arriving on that small pier by the cabin, I could finally breathe in the fresh air of untouched nature that has always been soothing to my soul. It's like you leave behind all your troubles at home, because out here, they are irrelevant. At the cabin, the only things that mattered is the things to keep you safe and warm and fed. We dug out our snowmobile that was parked near the pier and drove the short trip over to the cabin. That night, we mostly spent preparing noose traps and lunch for the next day. My father told me old stories of when he went hunting back in the days and such, and we shared in ceremonial hunter's shot of a single malt whiskey. I slept well that night, as I normally do, in the peace and quiet of the cabin. We got out of the cabin late following morning, due to us just enjoying the calming of a morning with no obligation. This would turn out to be a mistake, however. You see, the key point is to be out early so that you can utilize the sunlight as much as possible. We knew this, but sometimes you just want to sit down and eat a lazy breakfast and watch morning TV. When we had arrived at the Lavu, imagine a winter version of a TP, that we had set up the summer next to our lake, which was now frozen, of course, my father decided that he would take it easy that day and get the Lavu warmed up so that when I returned from the mountain there would be warm food and drink waiting for me. I had previously spent a lot of time by myself around the area, so walking around the mountain alone never bothered me and still does not to this day. So I started walking up the mountain overlooking the lake. It was difficult due to the heavy snow and me not bringing my skis. Instead, I opted for using an old pair of snowshoes that were hanging in the cabin. This resulted in me using way more time than I needed to get up to where I could find some grouse that I may shoot, as I knew from previous experiences that this was the area they would be in. After a lot of effort, I made it up, and despite being full of tracks and feces, it was abandoned. You see, it had snowed that night, and part of the morning, so the tracks must have been somewhat fresh, yet I could not see nor hear anything. So I stalked the forest upon the mountain for hours without any traces of life. That's when I noticed the silence. It's like what people with similar experiences say. There is always a deafening silence that preludes something bad. Like all the animals know it's time to get out of there and do just that. I remembered for the first time since childhood that I felt uneasy about being alone up there. But of course, I was not about to go empty-handed back to my father, so I continued. As I was walking around, I listened intently to any sound that might give away any other form of life. I remember being amazed at how loud my footsteps were. At this point, I was a tall yet skinny boy, even though I walked as slow and controlled as humanly possible. The uneasy feeling creeping closer and closer to the point where I decided to take a quick snack break and regain my previous calm state of mind. As I walked back to a clearing overlooking the lake, my footsteps seemed to almost lighten, as I felt more relaxed and at ease again. I sat down on a rock and ate a bar of chocolate that I had bought, and enjoyed the sun on my face, ridiculing myself for being spooked of what essentially was nothing. That's when I heard footsteps coming from the direction I had just been in. Loud and heavy footsteps of a grown man. I knew this because, as anyone can tell you, the sound of a biped walking on 2 feet is quite distinct from four-legged creatures such as moose or bears, especially in heavy snow. I tried calling out, because I immediately thought it was my father who had a change of heart, but there was no reply. I sat there on the rock, watching the direction of the footsteps, as they grew louder and louder. Several times I called out, and yet I received no reply. Feeling uneasy again, I decided to take out my phone and try to call my father. There on my phone I had an unread message from my father delivered 3 minutes ago. Coffee and lunch are ready. Simultaneously, the footsteps were somehow getting louder and louder, and I knew whatever was at the other end was not my father. This, and knowing that we were supposed to be the only 2 people in my radius, for many, many kilometers, made me instantly jump up. I grabbed my shotgun and noped out of there as soon as I had tightened my snowshoes. As I was making my way, with all the haste I could muster, I heard whatever it was stalking me pick up the pace, and I realized that the sound of my own 2 footsteps and whatever it was that was after me were almost in sync, to the point where there was only a slight difference when our feet hit the ground. I realized since then that whatever it was had followed me since I had entered the forest on the mountain, and was the cause of why I felt my footsteps were abnormally loud. I remember trying my best to run in hip-deep snow, not caring about the thick layer of branches that hit my cold face, leaving red marks all over. It came to the point where I could hear the extra pair of footprints, no more than 5 meters behind me. Yet when I turned around, there was nothing. I pushed all I had in me, and I finally managed to reach the frozen lake on the other side from the lava, and the extra pair of footsteps stopped. Exhausted by the kilometers plus that I ran in high snow, I made my way to the lava. My father seemed almost amused by how tired I seemed. He handed me a hot cup of coffee and asked if I saw anything. I didn't know what to say, and was honestly embarrassed by what had occurred, so I only said that I had spotted many tracks, but alas, no birds. However, in later years, I asked him about this and other strange occurrences around the area, and the answers have always been roughly the same. Don't worry about it, don't ask about it. Some things are better off ignored. My friends and I liked to night climb. We lived in the middle of a desert. One day we decided to go venture into an area we hadn't been before, but was public land. There are a lot of random dirt trails. We drove around for a while until we found a great canyon. The moon was full and lit up the desert. It was serene and beautiful, until it became time to leave. Mind you, there are no other lights other than the moonlight, my headlights, and soon the headlights of a bread truck. It came down one of the random little trails hauling ass and stopped dead in its tracks when I'm assuming it saw us. It sort of just rumbled there idle for a minute or two, and we just stood at the back of my SUV and peeked around to see if anyone was going to get out. Nope, they just sat there waiting and waiting and waiting. After a few minutes of this, I got weirded out and decided we should leave. We piled into my SUV and started driving in the opposite direction of the trail. The guy turned around, that bread truck, and started following us. I don't know if any of you have driven down a desert trail at night that isn't monitored, but it gets creepy. The bread truck was flying down the trail after us. I would turn down random trails trying to get away from it, going over the crest of a hill, but there it was, right behind us. We drove around for a good half hour or so with this truck just following us. Finally, I was able to get onto the highway and speed off. Unfortunately for me, it didn't follow. This happened back in 2011. I live really close to James A. Reed. It's a memorial wildlife area of a little over 3,000 acres. It's a popular location for fishing because it has something like 12 small lakes. Hiking, as there are numerous hiking trails that traverse the entire area, all of which are light hiking / nature walk sort of trails. It's a popular spot for photographers for shooting portraits, and during hunting season, it's popular for bow hunting. I'm an amateur photographer. I do portraiture for a side gig. I like to fish, and I also like to go hiking. So it's basically one of my favorite places, and I go here often. I basically broke into portraiture photography by shooting school photos and couples and such at this location. It has fields with tall grass, great colors in the fall, docks, and easy accessible changes in scenery. It's basically a photographic goldmine. I still do photography, but I'm quite a bit better known at this point, and obviously significantly better than I was then. But I still use James A. Reed as my go-to location for almost everything. Boy Scout troops also go hiking through the area on nature walks and such. It's just a very popular location. In the summer of 2011, the body of a 19-year-old guy was found at the wildlife park. They call it a wildlife park, but I mean the wildlife amount to deer, fish, and lots of snakes, squirrels, and cranes. I've never really seen anything else there, and I've been there more times than you could ever count. The story of this kid's body was a minor news story, but since I was so familiar with the area, it was of interest to me. The news report was immediately confusing. According to the report, the kid had been partying with some friends, OD'd at the party, and the story breaks apart here. His friends say that he wandered off and that they didn't know where he went. His mother thinks, for no clear reason, and this is the operating story that the news went with, that he OD'd at this party, and his friends dumped his body in the wildlife area in the middle of the night. Both of these things are pretty much impossible, and I'll explain why right now. The article mentioned which lake his body was found near. It was Bodark Lake, which is pretty much the furthest lake from the entrance to the park that you can get to. Getting to this particular lake requires driving down about 1.5 miles long paved road that hasn't seen any service in at least 2 decades. The thing is riddled with potholes that are car killers. If you don't know where they are, you have to take the road slow. Hitting one of these things in anything short of a full-size pickup will likely destroy your tire and wheel. I've driven it so many times I have the potholes memorized and can drive it pretty normally, weaving in and out of them when they come up. But in the dark of the night, this would be hard, especially for some drunk and high teenagers. But that in of itself isn't impossible to do. There are 3 gates between the entrance and where his body was found. One right at the driveway leading to the park, which is one of the large, swinging steel gates. The next gate is just after that. In order to get to Bodark, you need to make an immediate right-hand turn after the visitor center, and that is where you run into the 10-foot chain-link fence that's meant to keep the deer in the wildlife area. The fence runs the entire perimeter of the reserve, as it's right off a highway, and they'll want to make sure the deer stay in there for hunting season. You need to get through a second chain-link fence that's chained shut every night. The park opens at sunrise and closes at sunset. After you go through that gate, you get on the previously mentioned paved road for about 3 minutes and come to what they constitute as the ranger station, but is really just a big parking lot. From here you go through another gigantic fence that is chain-link shut. After you're through that gate, you're in the clear to get to Bodark Lake. The trail near Bodark is particularly scenic, and I've used it countless times for photo shoots. It's also a good walk through nature. So the next day my girlfriend and I decided that we would check it out to see if we could find where they found the body. I know, disrespectful, but we were gonna go there anyway, so why not? Well, we did find where they found the body. We know this because the police tape was still there, and it's one hell of a chore. In order to get to where the body was found, you have to start on the trail near Bodark, but about 5 minutes into the walk, go completely off the path and through the trees and brush down to an extremely steep slope and go downwards about 20 feet and cross through the stream at the bottom. The stream was about 3 to 4 feet deep, as it was running high through the water and it doesn't move very fast. The only reason we knew where we were going was because the original trail was high enough that we could see through the trees, and we caught a glint of the yellow caution tape way in the distance. While hiking, we both wore a pair of Vibram hiking shoes that didn't have any trouble with water. Yes, the ones with toes, but the water was still deep and we didn't particularly want to get swimming. So we walked upstream for quite a while until we found a section that was thin enough to jump across. Mind you, we walked upstream for about 10 minutes before we found this, and then walked back down the stream to where we could have continued in the direction of the caution tape, which we found we could no longer see, even though we were level with it. After a few more minutes of trudging through particularly thick brush and forestry, we finally arrived at the second stream, on the other side of which was the roped off area of police tape. The actual taped off area was pretty small, so we were able to pretty much tell exactly where the body was found. It was on a pile of rocks right on the other side of the stream. We didn't cross the stream because we'd found it, and that was good enough. There was nothing to see. We'd gone from a Class 0 nature walk to Class 2 at times Class 3 getting there. There was absolutely no possibility of any amount of drunken teenagers carrying a human body this far into the wilderness in the middle of the night. This is after they'd bypassed the 3 gates, which were never reported to have been broken into at all. This kid was way off the beaten path, and was very literally in the middle of the wilderness. It was so remote that his body was there for a couple of days before anyone found it. I've done a lot of hiking and even completely sober in the middle of the day. This was a serious challenge to get to. It's equally impossible that he just wandered away from some party in the middle of the night and found himself there. There are houses along the highway across from James A. Reed, most of which are farms, and if you go a couple of miles down that highway, you do find a residential area. But the notion that he got messed up, wandered miles down the road, hopped 2 10-foot fences, walked a mile down a barely paved road, went into the forest, crossed 2 deep streams, sat on a pile of rocks and decided to OD in the middle of the forest is equally, if not more, unlikely. So what happened to him? I don't know. I think it's a lot more likely that they went into the forest during operating hours and all started doing drugs in the middle of the forest and left him there where he died. But still, this is a stretch. I cannot stress to you the difficulty of getting to this location. Anyway, so we started our retreat back to the actual trail, climbing through the trees and brush, which was now significantly more difficult because we were going uphill, back to the first stream. And after that, it was a steep incline which was definitely going to require grabbing trees and getting firm footholds, and some teamwork. But before we got that far, we had to trek back upstream to get to the point where we could jump across it. And right here is where things go weird. As we're following the stream up, we stopped dead in our tracks as a middle-aged man in a full business suit was just walking in the stream. He was a tall dude. The water came up right around to his chest. He was in a white dress shirt, a black blazer, black tie, and had a briefcase in his hands that he was kind of letting float behind him. He was walking downstream, so coming directly towards us, but paid us no mind. We both stopped and stared at the guy and then at each other as if to silently say, "What the?" And both of us backed up as he approached us. He passed us without saying anything or even looking in our direction. He was bald, white, probably around 45 years old and fairly broad. He had a completely blank expression, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He had massive bags under his eyes which were completely dead. His expression was just dead. Slightly slack-jawed, eyes glossed over. It's worth noting he was dry from the chest up, like he just entered the water and started walking downstream. He was just walking straight down the stream very slowly. We just stood there completely silent, staring at this guy until he passed us by, and we were now looking at the back of his head as he marched forward. He could have easily exited the water at any point, the embankment wasn't difficult, but he just soldiered on down the stream. Now we moved way faster than we safely should have been, running up the stream to jump across and get back on the trail into our car, where we drove off and both immediately started asking each other what the hell that was. We tried to tell our friends about the experience, but it was just beyond really conveying how weird it was. I don't even think I can properly put into words to give you the proper context as to how eerie that was. It was just dead silent in the forest, or at least it seems that way. All we heard was him sloshing through the water as he slowly made his way downstream to wherever the hell he was going. I expected to read about another body being found, like this guy was off himself in the forest or something, but no such article ever materialized. But the vibe he gave off, man, I can't explain the feeling that seeing this guy gave us. It was overwhelming dread, confusion, and terror. I really don't even know how to put into words all the emotions we were feeling, and we both agreed there are no words for it. It was a foreign feeling, and I don't have any other strange experiences other than that. So I'm asking to all of you listeners, what the hell do you think we came across? I know I probably don't need all the backstory to the dead body, but it's a weird case that locals generally feel was not sufficiently answered, because anyone familiar with the area and location will tell you exactly what I just did. Both accounts of how we got there were impossible. So, were the body and the businessman related? Who knows? Did we stumble upon something else while looking for the location? Who or what do you think this dude was? I want to tell you it's just a random guy walking down a stream of disgusting murky water in a business suit because weird things have happened, but I can't shake the feeling that this guy gave off. What do you all think? So this story is from back when I was a 17-year-old moron, back in the spring of 2012. While it may seem dramatic, it had almost a decade to fester in that tiny box in our minds where we shove things that are best left alone. My little brother and I were spending the weekend with Dad. He had been leasing this cool house for about 3 years, near enough to the town centre that I could hop on a bus and hang out with friends, but right up against a massive forest owned by the local university. I could open the sliding door in my room and, if I felt like it, slide down a hill, crash through some blackberry bushes, be on a 3-mile loop trail that went against the fancy pants golf course the university also owned. Now, I was, as stated, a dumb teenager. And as a dumb teenager, I decided I would go out and about at night, since Dad worked the night shift, and nobody, not my mum, not God, and not the crappy next-door neighbor lady, could stop me from drawing inappropriate images in the golf course and sand traps at 1 a.m, if that's what I wanted, which I did want. The sand traps are something I do not regret. So for those 3 years I did exactly that. When I was too keyed up to sleep or angry with stupid teenage things, I went out that sliding door once my brother was asleep, locked it, and went off into the woods. This was fine, except for the last time I did it. I skeetled down the hill at around 2 a.m, and at this point, even in the dark, I knew how to get around the blackberry bushes without incident, chucked on my crappy old earbuds and got walking. I wasn't a super athletic person, but I could sprint decently, even if my asthma started burning my lungs almost instantly. I loved the outdoors, and I knew these woods like the back of my hand, so I was overconfident in my safety, which, as you'll soon see, was a big mistake. Everything was calm for maybe half an hour. I shuffled past the first long stretch of golf course and kept going until I realized that the forest had gone dead silent. Even at night, in late spring, in my state the woods are audibly full of animal life. I hear nothing. If you'd have told me that my crappy $1 store earbuds could have saved my life that morning, I'd have laughed myself sick. but that warning sign might have given me the rest of my life. I remember the thought, I've watched too many horror movies, but my gut still told me that something was off. I knew one tree that was easy to climb across the bridge over a nearby creek, and made myself keep going. If I just got higher up, maybe I'd see a reason for the quiet. Then I heard footsteps on gravel, maybe 150 feet back. I decided not to wait. I picked up the pace and heard a sharp bark of shit as I rounded the turn at a sudden sprint. The brush was a thick curtain on that side, but if even I could have looked back through it, you could not have convinced me to do anything. The bridge was old wood marking where the wood opened up to a meadow and golf course on the side, the one I was barreling towards. The planks thudded as I passed it. It was so loud, and my heart was beating louder. I heard gravel back near that turn, and to this day I do not know why I flung myself past the post at the other side and down under that bridge. I remember the red clay mud cushioning my fall with a muted squelch. Spring rains had the creek swollen to a noisy little river. I pulled myself out, blindly cramming myself under the wood as it sloped to meet the bank with the splinters and spiders, and praying to God, any that could hear me, that I was hidden. I then heard footsteps pounding from the other side of the bridge to somewhere above me. I crammed a filthy, muddy hand over my mouth and tried to breathe deep and slow and silent. They were right there, the wood settling heavy over my head as mud plastered my thin t-shirt and ponytail to my back. The words I heard next were a jumble, but I heard, "Where? Fast. That stupid girl," over and over. I remember wanting to let out a high, hysterical laugh at first. I wasn't that fast. This was a young man's voice. But it was off and wrong sounding somehow. I wanted to laugh so hard. I had gotten college acceptances 2 months before, and I had my life in order after a crappy stint as a teenager, and I was scared of some dumbass who couldn't even figure out I obviously couldn't have gotten out of sight in more ground that fast. He was starting to move back the way he came. It felt like a bad joke. The rest is anticlimactic. He left, and I hid until the sun started turning everything grey in the weak morning light. I unfolded my stiff limbs and followed the water out past the woods into a main road. I staggered along sidewalks back to my dad's house for almost an hour, jumping at shadows. My brother was still asleep when I got back. The dogs were on my bed, whining for pets. My dad came home while I was sitting in the shower and had coffee ready when I stumbled out. Or why I wasn't bawling in my overly fluffy robe as he passed me a big mug of coffee and went to take a shower of his own. But I never went back there after dark. I consider myself lucky. I still like forests and the outdoors because this could have ruined a lifelong hobby of mine. I still never have both earbuds in when I'm walking or hiking to this day. Always a bit worried if it gets too quiet. So to the guy who was in the woods, waiting for someone, maybe me, maybe someone else, let's not meet again. Sound fair? This happened almost 3 years ago exactly. I had just turned 15, and in Finland where I live, turning 15 is a big thing for teens, since when you turn 15, you can get a 50cc moped license, and these kind of bikes are a huge part of youth culture here. Long story short, I just got my license and I was in a party at a friend's house. This friend of mine came from a wealthy family, and their family owned a huge plot of land, mostly full of inhabited forests and lakes. His house was pretty much in the middle of their land, and it was a very remote place surrounded by forest. The nearest village was at least 20 miles away. Although I lived pretty far away, I insisted on going by myself with my brand new moped since I was so excited of finally having one. My parents were obviously against this, but ultimately allowed me to drive myself there. The party lasted the entire day, and when it was around 2 a.m. I had to leave. Although their family is wealthy, the only road that connects my friend's house to the big main road is a long, badly kept, and narrowly paved road surrounded by forest. It is unsettling as hell, especially at nighttime. It should have been illuminated property. But at the time, pretty much every single street lamp was either broken or tripped over by storms. I had asked them several times why they didn't take care of the road, but they simply replied that they weren't that interested in paying a huge amount of money for some company to come over and repave the entire road and replace every single streetlight. Since it's already completely dark, the only thing illuminating the road was the small single front light in my moped. After about 10 minutes on the road, I was about 5 or so minutes away from the main road, so it was still pitch black. Nothing was out of the ordinary until I saw movement in the corner of my eye. I saw a figure running from the pitch black forest and falling down on its face in the middle of the road in front of me with branches and leaves flying around it. I slammed the brakes and luckily avoided hitting the figure. The back brake locked up, so I ended up falling over and sliding along the road a bit. When I finally stopped, I looked up. I was okay apart from a few scratches, and looked to where the figure was laying. Of course, I thought that it was an animal like a moose or deer, but quickly realized it wasn't. It was an adult human. A man. At this point, he stood up. We were 3 meters from each other, just staring. I've never been more scared in my life. Even more disturbing was that this man seemed to be more scared of me than I of him. He was about 20 to 30 years old, short, thin, with a pale face and eyes that were deeply sunken into his sockets. If you know what a badly malnourished person's face looked like, you'll know exactly how he appeared. He was wearing a dirty turquoise hoodie, basketball shorts, despite it being less than 5 Celsius outside. He had unkempt blonde hair full of debris and leaves, wearing no shoes, only soaking wet socks. At this point, he was constantly shaking, jolting, and glaring to the direction he came out of with a worried expression on his face, like he was being chased, or he knew there was something bad in the forest. I wanted to say something to him, but I was unable to come out with anything, and after a short while he looked straight at me and opened his mouth. It was like he was about to say something, but he quickly backpedaled, closed his mouth, and suddenly, and without warning, bolted to the forest without a flashlight or any source of light, vanishing quickly. I stood there for a while alone, before running to my moped, lifting it up, and driving as fast as I could to the main road. My moped had quite a few big dents, a broken front mask, and a damaged exhaust, but was still drivable. I drove home and woke up my parents to explain everything while I was still shivering from shock. They obviously were furious that I had just crashed my moped and didn't believe what happened. They thought I was just being a jackass and doing stunts until I fell over. I didn't get grounded, but they didn't let me drive at night anymore. I was alright with that, since I didn't want to do that either. For the entirety of the following week, I asked anyone who was at the party or living nearby if they'd seen anything unusual. I also followed the news to find out if there was anything bad that happened nearby that night, or if there was an escaped convict or a mental hospital patient loose, but nothing showed up, and no one else saw anything. I still sometimes think who that guy was, and what he was doing in the forest without a light in the middle of the night. I actually feel quite bad for the guy, and that I didn't help him because he seemed like he wasn't all that okay. Was he drunk? High? Perhaps in the middle of a bad trip? Or maybe some sort of psychosis? Was he abused? Part of a cult? I guess I'll never know, but I do wish I knew. This story happened slightly over 20 years ago, back when I was 16. During this time, I lived with my mum and stepdad in a remote area 70 miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada. I had gone out to visit my friend, being allowed to drive myself for the first time ever. Had a lovely time watching a movie and getting food together until it was time for me to head home. The curfew I was given was 10 p.m, with this saving grace being that if I was running late for any reason, to find a payphone and call. The night wrapped around me and my old 71 Chevy pickup, as there were no street lights or houses for most of my way home. As I pulled up to the first of 2 stop signs, I could see an older sedan. Old cars were still pretty common in the area, stopped with its hazards on. I pulled up behind it and waited as a man of 30 to 40 started walking towards me from the driver's side. Even at this point, I didn't have any alarm bells going off. Being in the middle of the Mojave Desert, providing assistance to stranded people was common. People rapidly get into severe problems, thereby not having enough water when a vehicle breaks down or not realizing that it's a desert, and people die wandering delirious away from the highway trying to find help. I rolled down my window as he came abreast of my door, and all I could smell was the liquor on him. I could see another man in the passenger seat, as this was before anyone I knew had cell phones, and the nearest payphone was a good 10-minute drive ahead. I didn't have a way to call the cops on a drunk driver immediately. The man explained that his car stalled and asked if I could help them out. I asked if his car was stick shift, which it was, so I asked if he was familiar with push starting it. He said yes. So I agreed to, as gently as I could, push their car with my truck while they turned the engine over. For anyone who isn't familiar with this technique, it's a way to start a manual car that is having battery or starter issues specifically, to get it somewhere to work it on. I knew my truck would be fine, and didn't feel like it would be wise to get out and try to push their car physically. Pushing started the car working without a hitch, but here's where things go south. They get out to thank me, and invite me to hang out with them to have some fun. I respectfully decline. They pull off to the side of the road and I continue on my way, only they start following me. So here I am, 9:50 and running late because I stopped to help them. Admittedly, I haven't given myself much leeway since leaving my friend's house, and these drunk, creepy older men have started to follow me on a road without any man-made lights except for my headlights, and I'm at least 10 minutes from a payphone. I think to myself perhaps I'm being paranoid, so I turn down a road that I know gave me a few turn-offs to either head back to town or loop around to the gas station with a payphone. The car follows behind me. I take another turn that only leads to a couple of houses at the end of the road, and they turned behind me. I make another turn to loop around back and head the station, and they follow me again. So at least I knew they were following me and not just heading home. At this point, my heart is pounding. I decided to try something to lose them. I pull to the side of the road. I see them pull up behind me. I wait as the driver gets out the car and begins walking towards me. His companion also gets out and starts walking towards me, and I wait until they're almost at my tailgate and then floor it. My wheels dig into the rocks and puff dirt, causing a cloud behind me. With the lead way, I head towards the gas station. The gas station is deserted, but the payphone is showered in light from the gas pumps, so I call home and explained what happened and why I was running late. My stepdad asked if the gas station worker could be seen, and I let him know I couldn't see him behind the counter and that he was probably in the back. I wasn't in trouble, but I was asked to hurry home. So to the 2 drunk idiots that wanted to mess with 16-year-old me on the first night driving by myself, let's not meet again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed our adventures to the middle of nowhere. Really strong stories today and yesterday. We've had some really good material, so I really hope that you guys have liked it as much as I've enjoyed narrating it. I always get to listen to the stories before all of you, but then again I do read them to you. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter because you want to, and I want you to, so why don't we just both agree and you can go ahead and do that. Oh, and Instagram too, if you use that. Thanks as always to my lovely patrons and members. You guys are amazing. You help keep the channel going. And yeah, just from the bottom of my heart, thank you. It really does make a difference. especially when YouTube goes ahead and demonetizes videos, like the demon one from the other day, just out the blue. Hey, no more money. Thanks, YouTube. No warning, no appeal system. Just gone. They were fine with it for 2 days, but then on the third day they were like, hey, you know what? We change our mind. I don't know if it's because, the word demon or something, but I found it, a bit odd. There was nothing particularly graphic or horrible in there, so I don't know. If anyone has an explanation for why that happened, I'd sure as hell be grateful. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Follow me on Twitter. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.